Florida, paradise on earth, sunshine, beaches, and endless lakes. But beneath this beauty, predators are watching. May 2025, a peaceful canoe ride turns to horror. From the depths, an 11-foot alligator explodes. The boat flips, and in seconds, the predator drags its victim under, spinning her in a fatal death roll as her husband watches, helpless. Days later, terror strikes again. Florida's first ever fatal black bear attack. An 89-year-old man and his dog mauled inside his own home. From alligators to sharks to bears, Florida hides some of the deadliest wildlife in America, and these real-life encounters will make you think twice before stepping into the wild. Hit like and subscribe. This is Fierce. On March 3, 2025, a terrifying incident took place in Polk County, Florida. A group of friends decided to enjoy an afternoon paddling in Lake Kissimmee State Park. It's a wildlife haven with access to the Kissimmee chain of lakes. But in Florida, where there's water, there are also alligators, and Kissimmee is no exception. The group launched their kayaks at the state park before paddling to Rosalie and then onto Tiger Lake. They were enjoying their time on the water. It was tranquil and peaceful. When they reached Tiger Lake, their halfway point, they turned around and headed back the way they came. Although they had made the outward journey without a problem, the return trip was about to become a nightmare. As one of the women dipped her paddle into the water, she nearly scraped the head of an enormous alligator. It had been completely camouflaged against the reflective water surface. Instantly, it lashed out and bit down on the woman's arm. She gave a shriek and miraculously was able to pull her arm free. If the alligator hadn't let go then, she would have been pulled into the water. The whole group rushed to help. The peaceful paddle had turned into a life-or-death situation in an instant, and there was no knowing if the alligator was going to attack again. It had disappeared from sight. Was it about to bob up next to their low-lying kayaks and strike another member of the group? Nobody could tell. But their focus right then was on the woman who had been bitten. The woman was in so much pain she could hardly move, but they had to get her out of there, and they had to act fast. Immediately, somebody called 911. They tried to give detailed information about where they were, but it was difficult to give a precise location. The dispatcher talked them through how to send a pin drop and reassured them that help was on the way. But things were getting worse. The 911 dispatcher tried to keep everyone calm. A helicopter had been sent to the location and would be with them in a matter of minutes. But when asked where the alligator was, the group knew that it was still nearby. They couldn't see it, but something gave its position away. The life vest that had been pulled into the water during the attack was bobbing up and down in the middle of the canal. It was still somehow caught on the alligator, a shocking reminder that the predator was still lurking just feet from where they were. The group of friends tried to keep the woman calm and comfortable. She was out of the kayak now and lying amongst the rushes and reeds. It was a terrifying situation to be in because nobody knew if they were going to be attacked again. They considered trying to put her back into the kayak and tow her to a boat ramp where first responders would be waiting, but she was in too much pain to move. She started to go into shock. Then, mercifully, 45 minutes after making the 911 call, a helicopter whirred overhead. The group of kayakers started to wave their paddles, but the helicopter was having trouble trying to land. Instead, an airboat arrived and the woman was taken to the hospital to recover from her harrowing ordeal. This was a shocking incident that was retold over and over on social media, but it didn't stop people from visiting the beautiful area and venturing out on the water. And sadly, just 2 months later, history was about to repeat itself. On Tuesday, May 6, 2025, 61-year-old Cynthia Diekema and her husband Dave were paddling in their 14-foot canoe along the same waterways leading towards Lake Kissimmee. It was a lovely day to be out on the water. Dave sat in the back of the open canoe, steering it out towards the lake, while Cynthia sat up front, propelling them both forward with each stroke of her paddle. This was the couple's happy place. From nearby Davenport, the couple enjoyed being out and about amongst nature. Cynthia regularly posted pictures onto her Instagram account, showing how happy they were and the various activities they got up to in their downtime. Canoeing was one of those activities, but it was about to take a dark and sinister turn. As Cynthia and Dave guided the canoe around the edge of the lake, near the mouth of Tiger Creek, the water became quite shallow. The muddy bottom of the lake was just 2 feet below, but peering into the water either side of them, they couldn't see what was lurking beneath. The sunlight shimmered off the surface, the rushes and reeds casting reflections and shadows from the banks. Little did they know, they were steering the canoe directly towards an alligator that was lying beneath the surface. When the canoe floated over the top of the ginormous reptile, there was an eruption of chaos. The canoe had startled the alligator, and it had immediately lashed out, thrashing with its tail and arching its body up and out of the water. Its incredible power and strength upturned the canoe as it smashed into the hull. Before Dave and Cynthia knew what was happening, they were being flung out of the canoe and into the cold water all around them. A moment of terror, confusion, and panic followed, but for Cynthia, she had landed in the water directly on top of the alligator. In an instant, it wheeled around and grabbed her in its powerful jaws. Dave could see the reptile thrashing around with Cynthia in its vice-like grip. He grabbed his paddle and smacked the alligator with all of his strength, trying desperately to save his wife. It had all happened so quickly. One wrong move, and Cynthia was now in the fight for her life. But the alligator wasn't going to let go. In a heart-stopping moment for Dave, he watched as the alligator sank beneath the surface of the lake, taking his wife with it. He made a desperate call for help, leaving his paddle beside the lake to mark the location as he ran to find someone who could rescue Cynthia. When the call came through to emergency services around 4 p.m., first responders raced to the scene, and a helicopter was scrambled to help in the search. It didn't take long before the chopper spotted Cynthia's body floating in the water, not far from where she had been taken. She was pronounced dead at the scene. It was obviously a devastating loss for Cynthia's family. She was a much-loved mother, grandmother, and wife, and the shock from her untimely death was felt far and wide. That night, wildlife officials reported trappers had caught an 11-foot 4-inch alligator, matching the length description of the gator involved in the attack. The following day, they caught a second alligator, approximately 10 to 11 feet in length. Wildlife officials repeated the warnings they had issued just 2 months earlier. Keep a safe distance if you spot an alligator. Only swim in designated areas and avoid swimming at night or with pets, which should also be kept on a leash and away from the water's edge. Never feed alligators. It is illegal and strongly advised against. Covering over 728,000 acres, Big Cypress Wildlife Management Area spans parts of Collier, Dade, and Monroe counties and borders Everglades National Park. It's an outdoor adventurer's dream, but it's also home to some deadly predators: alligators, the Florida panther, and the black bear. 89-year-old Robert Markle lived in Florida's unincorporated Collier County community of Jerome. He was a quiet and unassuming man and enjoyed the peace and quiet of his relatively remote home off State Road 29. The quiet life suited Robert. Despite reaching a grand old age, he kept himself active, and every day he would venture out to walk his beloved dog. But on Monday, May 5th, 2025, the unthinkable happened. Robert was home alone, just him and his faithful companion. He woke up as dawn broke and got dressed. Then, in the early morning light, he stepped outside his camper home to take his dog for a walk, but he would not return. There was a predator nearby. A black bear was lurking in the undergrowth just a few hundred yards away. It was one of around 4,000 black bears in Florida. Typically considered shy, these black bears rarely cause problems for Florida residents, but this time was different. Nobody knows exactly what happened. At the time of making this video, the details are still coming in, and officials are speculating about the circumstances. Either Robert inadvertently startled the black bear, or it was purposefully stalking him. 85% of the black bear's diet is made up of vegetation. The rest is from meat and fish, largely carrion. But there are times when black bears see humans as prey. An elderly man with little in the way to defend himself could be seen as an easy meal. Black bears are nearly impossible to see if they are stalking you. They tread carefully over the ground, pausing to hide behind trees and bushes, stopping to sniff the air and listen to their surroundings. People rarely see them until it's too late. Had Robert turned around at the last second to see the bear lunging at him? Had he been struck from behind and knocked to the ground before feeling the immense pressure of the bear on his back? Or had his dog startled the bear and her cubs? Maybe she was acting out defensively. She saw the pensioner as a threat and needed to neutralize it by delivering a powerful blow. Whatever happened, there was a ferocious fight that morning, and Robert's daughter was about to have the shock of her life. Early on Monday morning, she heard a loud yelping. There was a commotion coming from the edge of the community housing. She stepped outside. The air was crisp. She felt an uneasiness wash over her, and she walked down the street. When she rounded the corner, she saw a terrifying sight. There, just yards from where she stood, was a black bear. She froze, hardly daring to breathe. Then, when she looked a little closer, she saw where the yelps had been coming from. The bear was standing over a dog. It was heartbreaking to watch the dog's last moments, feeling powerless to stop it. Then came the terrifying realization that this wasn't just any dog. Robert's daughter recognized it straight away. This was her father's dog. She watched for a few horrified seconds as the dog struggled in the bear's powerful jaws, but there was nothing she could do. Then the bear looked up, and their eyes met for a second. Robert's daughter retreated slowly and carefully. No one was out and about that early in the morning. She was all alone and knew the danger she was in. When she was out of sight, she rushed to call 911. As she made the call, her heart was thundering in her chest. She had so many questions. Where was her father? Had he run off while the dog distracted the bear? Or had he already succumbed to a bear attack? At the age of 89, he was vulnerable at the best of times. She was terrified something had happened to him, but couldn't locate him. He wasn't at his camper and didn't respond when she called his name. But there were some disturbing signs at the camper van, as the sheriff's department was about to find out. It was 7:07 a.m. when Collier County Sheriff's Office received the distressing call for help. By the time they arrived at the scene, the bear had run off into the surrounding brush. But there was still no sign of Robert. Officers searched Robert's camper. It was in disarray. The mattress was off the bed, and there were items scattered all over the place. Clearly, something had happened to the elderly man. When looking outside, the officers found some of Robert's belongings. First, his wallet lay on the ground, partially hidden by vegetation. There were spatters of blood all over it. Next, they found his pants, and then his shirt, both also bloody and torn. Things were going from bad to worse. They knew they would find something devastating soon. They searched around where the dog's body lay, cautiously scouring the surrounding woodland. It wasn't long before they sadly found what they were looking for. Just within a wooded area off SR 29 near Copeland, north of Everglades City, they spotted something. It was the body of a man lying crumpled on the ground, 100 yards from the dog. It was Robert. At first, there was no way of telling how long Robert had been lying there for, but it was estimated that he had been killed around 2 hours earlier. He was battered and bruised. He had bite marks on his body and claw marks across his face. The pensioner had been no match for the black bear. But had it been the same black bear that had killed his dog? Was there a killer bear on the loose? The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission urged caution to local residents. They warned people who lived in the vicinity to remain vigilant and for others not to visit the area. The incident sent shockwaves through the local communities. Although bear attacks in Florida are reported each year, this was the first fatal black bear attack in the state on record. Typically, people find themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. In 2018, there was a serious attack on a man in his own backyard. The attack occurred on January 9, 2018. Although it was a particularly nasty incident, that particular attack 7 years ago did not result in a fatality. Andrew Mounier opened his back door to let his dog out when his dog growled and ran back inside the house. Curious, Andrew stepped outside and came face to face with 3 black bears in his backyard. One of them pounced on him so quickly that he didn't have time to react. He managed to survive the attack, but sustained substantial injuries to his face. And the same thing happened to Robert. Had he accidentally startled a black bear outside his camper, or had he been purposefully stalked by the black bear? Something that black bears are known to do. While officers were scouring the area for more clues and going from door to door to find any witnesses, 3 loud shots rang out. Wildlife officials had located 3 black bears in the area. Out of extra precaution, they killed all 3. DNA samples collected at the site of Robert's body and those from the bears themselves were sent to the University of Florida in Gainesville for analysis. At the time of making this video, it's not known whether any of those bears were responsible for the attacks. As well as shooting the nearby bears, wildlife officers also set up traps and cameras to try and capture the culprit. Only time will tell whether those bears were responsible for the attack, and as more details emerge, it will become clearer about what exactly happened to Robert Markle. 15-year-old Lulu Gribbin and her twin sister Ellie were on vacation from Alabama. It was the first mother-daughter holiday the twins had been on with their mother Ann, and it was going to be one none of them would forget. The youngsters were visiting Walton County on the Florida Panhandle when disaster struck. It was meant to be the time of their lives, enjoying the pristine white sandy beaches, splashing about in the water and sunning themselves as summertime approached. On June 7, 2024, they decided to spend the day at the seaside. So after eating, they headed for Rosemary Beach. It was a perfect day. They threw a ball in the air, playing volleyball and rushing around in the sand. Then, to cool off, they splashed in the water along with countless other holidaymakers. Lulu and Ellie's mother left the girls to enjoy themselves and walked along to another section of the beach. But the girls weren't the only ones diving about in the waves. There was something else lurking below the surface. It had been drawn to the shallower waters in search for food. The noise and commotion from the splashes in the water, the smells and vibrations emanating from the shoreline, they all drew something stealthy and powerful nearer. It was a bull shark. Able to survive in both salt and fresh waters, bull sharks are found in rivers, along coastlines, and in the open ocean. Typically growing up to 8 feet long, though often exceeding 11 feet, bull sharks are considered one of the most dangerous sharks in our oceans. They are aggressive by nature and often venture into shallower waters where humans are more likely to be. Along with great whites and tiger sharks, bull sharks are responsible for the greatest number of attacks on people throughout the world, as Lulu was about to find out. The girls decided to swim to a sandbar that was a little distance from the beach. The seafloor dipped significantly from the shore, so they took with them a boogie board, which they borrowed from another tourist. As they neared the sandbar, Lulu felt her feet touch something. The water was relatively clear, and when one of them dived down to touch the bottom, she resurfaced with a sand dollar in her hand. The others all joined in, taking it in turns to grab a sand dollar from the sandy bottom. But their splashes and laughter sent vibrations through the water. The bull shark was coming closer. All of a sudden, the girls felt uneasy. It was almost a sixth sense that something was about to happen. A chill filled the air, and they decided to head back to the beach. None of them knew what to make of the strange feeling that came over them, but whatever it was, it sent them swimming back to the shore as quickly as they could. It turned out their senses were right. Unbeknown to the teenagers, just a few miles up the coastline, a shark was attacking a 45-year-old woman in the water at Watersound Beach. But the news hadn't reached those on Rosemary Beach yet. When they made it back out of the water, the girls dried off and sunned themselves on the sand. They chatted excitedly amongst themselves, and then began chatting to another group of teenagers next to them. It wasn't long before this other group ran into the water and began splashing about as Lulu and her friends had done earlier. Lulu decided to join them for one last swim before heading back to their accommodation. It was a decision that would change her life forever. As the girls kicked about in the water, the bull shark came in to investigate. Then Lulu's friend Adele screamed, "Shark!" Ellie wheeled around to see Adele swimming for her life towards the beach. She knew she wasn't joking, and Ellie also dived towards the shore. The shark weaved through those in the water. It bit down on McCrae's foot, but it wasn't done yet. "Stay calm," Lulu shouted as she saw a dark shadow swimming towards her. But it was too late. Everyone was already rushing for the safety of the beach. When Ellie made it onto the sand, she spun around, and that's when she saw it. The water had turned a distinct cloudy red, and right there in the middle of it was Lulu. She was screaming for help. For a split second, Ellie froze. Seeing her sister pleading for her life was something that will haunt her for the rest of her days. Lulu lifted her arm up out of the water, reaching for Lila, who was closest to her, but her hand was missing. It had been bitten off by the shark. Blood poured down her outstretched arm and dispersed in the water. Lulu was in a state of shock. She couldn't feel the pain, but seeing her hand missing was one of the most terrifying sights of her life. In the commotion and sand-filled water, the shark thrashed about and then clamped down on Lulu's leg. She screamed out and kicked wildly, trying to pull her leg free. Then seconds later, the shark let go and swam away. Lulu then blacked out before she could make it to shore. When they dragged her onto the sand, Ellie could see just how devastating the injuries to her twin were. Not only was her hand missing, but so was most of her right leg. Her femur was showing. Most of the muscle and skin was torn from the bone. She was losing blood, a lot of blood. Also on the beach that day were a couple of trauma nurses and more medical professionals who rushed to help. Although none of them knew each other, their training immediately kicked in, and they worked efficiently and calmly as a team, applying pressure to Lulu's arm and leg, drastically stemming the bleeding and desperately trying to keep her alive. But nobody knew if she would make it or not. Lulu came around. She opened her eyes and could see everyone on the beach working on her. She told herself just to breathe and to keep her eyes open. She knew if she kept doing those things, then she might make it to the hospital alive. Moments later, emergency crews arrived, and Lulu was airlifted to Sacred Heart Hospital in Pensacola. She was rushed into surgery. When she arrived at the hospital, Lulu had lost 2/3 of her blood. Surgeons worked tirelessly to keep Lulu alive, but they couldn't save her leg. They amputated just above the knee. She was put on a ventilator until she was strong enough to breathe for herself. When Lulu woke up after her first major surgery, she looked at her mom and said, "I made it." 4 months after the attack, Lulu started back at school part-time. She is determined to become a doctor one day, a dream that she had thought she had lost following the attack. While she has suffered life-changing injuries, she knows that she is lucky to be alive. She is now advocating for an alert system to be put in place following a shark attack. Had she, her friends, or mother known about the shark attack, just up the coast from them at Watersound Beach that happened 90 minutes earlier, none of them would have ventured into the water that day. Although they make the headlines when they happen and they send shockwaves through the communities, luckily shark attacks are relatively rare. The year before, in 2023, there were just 69 unprovoked shark attacks in the world, 10 of which were deadly. It was a Thursday night on September 21st, 2023, and 41-year-old Sabrina was walking home. Except that she didn't have a house. The place she called home was a camp in some woods in Largo, Florida. It was a known refuge for homeless people, and it had been some time since Sabrina had a roof of her own over her head. She fought with addiction most of her life, but that didn't make her a bad person. She lived for her family, particularly her daughter, 23-year-old Brianna Doris, and her young grandchildren, aged just 1 and 3. She could never help them out financially, but she always offered to look after the children when she could, and was one of those people who would help those she saw struggling, whether it was helping an elderly person load groceries into their shopping cart or helping someone cross the road. But on that fateful night, no one was looking out for Sabrina. She had been into town and was heading back to the woods. Sabrina wrapped her arms around herself. When she was just 40 feet from the edge of the woods, near 134th Avenue North and 121st Street North, she had to cross a canal. It was known as McKay Creek. The water was murky. It was covered in green algae and duckweed. She crossed the pedestrian footbridge over the water daily, but she failed to notice a dark shape protruding from the water's surface. It was mostly submerged in the canal. Only its large, round eyes were visible. It was an alligator. But this was not just any alligator. This was huge. Measuring over 13 feet long, this giant was using the canal to move between Ridgecrest Lake and Taylor Lake. People knew there were alligators in the two lakes, and they had spotted some enormous ones in the past. It's believed that all bodies of fresh water in Florida are inhabited by alligators. With 1.3 million in the state, there's a good chance of running into one if you're foolish enough to jump into a pond or a lake. Sabrina, however, was not foolish, but something did happen that night. Maybe she tripped by the canal. Maybe she lost her footing. Nobody knows. But she ended up tumbling down the bank and into the canal. And she landed right next to the alligator. Always an opportunistic hunter, the alligator immediately snapped its jaws. Sabrina saw the enormous shadow erupting out of the water right next to her. There was nothing she could do. She didn't even let out a scream before the reptile clamped its jaws around her waist. It shook its head so violently from side to side that the air was knocked from Sabrina's lungs. The power of the bite crushed her bones. The pain was electrifying, but the adrenaline was pumping through her body, giving her every chance to fight back. But Sabrina was no match for the alligator. In a matter of seconds, the damage was done. Sabrina breathed her last breath, and the water was still. Nobody heard a thing. Nobody saw the commotion in the canal. Not until the next day. Jamarcus Bullard had a job interview on the Friday afternoon. Slightly nervous, but ready to give it his best, he set off to the location. It was a warm, sunny day. There wasn't a cloud in the sky as Jamarcus walked along the sidewalk. Then he came toward McKay Creek. As he stepped onto the metal footbridge, he glanced down into the water. The canal was as murky as ever, but there was something that caught his eye. It was large and dark and sticking out above the surface. It took Jamarcus a few seconds to realize that it was an alligator, and a really big one. He smiled and stopped walking. He leaned on the railings and instinctively reached for his mobile phone to take a photo. He had never seen a gator before, and this one was an impressive size. But as Jamarcus flicked his camera on, he saw something that made his heart leap. There was something inside the alligator's mouth. It was pale and white. It was a pair of legs. Jamarcus immediately thought that it must have been a mannequin, as it didn't look lifelike. It was just the lower half of a torso, but then came the shocking realization that the legs weren't made from plastic. They were real human legs. Jamarcus froze as he watched the alligator sink beneath the surface. The legs disappeared from sight, and barely a ripple remained. He couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. As quick as he could, Jamarcus rushed to a nearby fire department and ran inside to tell them what he had just seen. Within minutes, emergency services arrived on the scene. The area was cordoned off and the search for the alligator began. But it hadn't moved. It reappeared above the surface in the same location, with its jaws still clamped firmly around the legs and lower torso of Sabrina. It was a chilling reminder of just how dangerous these animals are, and just how unsafe Florida's waterways were. Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission sent officers to capture the animal. While it was lying semi-submerged in amongst the thick weed of the canal, they secured a rope around its mouth and a chain to help haul it out of the water. When it was held in position, an officer shot the alligator in its skull with a rifle. It died instantly. It was an impressive beast. Another officer took out a measuring tape and recorded an impressive 13 feet 9.5 inches from snout to tail. The human legs were retrieved from the water, and the department now had the gruesome task of identifying the victim and performing a necropsy on the gator. When it was cut open, more body parts spilled out. They were able to identify Sabrina from some tattoos on her body, and it wasn't long before the family received the devastating and shocking news. Sabrina was only the third person to have been taken by an alligator in Pinellas County since the 1970s. However, it didn't matter how rare such an attack was. Her family was still inconsolable at her loss. The community came together to support Sabrina's young daughter and grandchildren. Now that they had identified the victim, officers still wanted to find out exactly what had happened. They scoured the camp where Sabrina had been living. Although it was just yards from the water, there was no sign that the alligator had ventured into it and plucked Sabrina from her bed in the middle of the night. There was no sign of a struggle along the canal bank, no skid marks where the 41-year-old may have slipped into the water. It was a mystery. Some theorized that Sabrina may have died before being consumed by the alligator, but the autopsy report showed that was not the case. She died from blunt force trauma and sharp force injuries. These were consistent with an alligator attack. They were also able to determine that she had died on the Thursday night or early Friday morning, as her remains had not been inside the alligator for long. She was alive and well on the Wednesday, as she had spent time with her family, and her body was discovered on the Friday afternoon. As news of the terrible incident spread throughout the community, people were shocked and saddened. Locals would walk their children along the edge of the canal. They would stop and look at the water. It was a disaster waiting to happen. Now, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission erected fencing along the side of the canal and signs to warn people of the dangers. It reminded people that it's possible to live alongside these ancient reptiles, but stay away from the water's edge.